Recently I was lucky enough to find a small amount of DMT, which happened to be enough for 9 experiments. The first was a small dose, probably less than 10 milligrams, smoked with poor technique on some foil. The second was an 85 milligrams oral trip, taken with moclobamide, which resulted in an overall plus experience with several brief periods when I would get sucked into a very intense, strong plus trip. I also experienced limited, weak entity contact during that experience. I wrote trip reports for both of those experiences. My second, third, fourth, and fifth experiences all occurred within a 2-hour time period, each time with between 5 milligrams and 7 milligrams smoked on a small amount of cannabis. I found that experience, or series of experiences, if you don't think I'm cheating by counting them as separate, to be highly enjoyable. So a few nights later I decided to get a bit deeper into DMT space. But, I only had a small amount of DMT left. 24 milligrams to be precise. This may sound like a small amount of DMT to you, and it certainly is. But if there was one thing I learned a few nights earlier, it was that a little bit of DMT goes a long way. One thing to consider is my technique smoking the DMT on top of cannabis. I am positive that this potentiates the DMT experience by an unquantifiable degree. I have no doubt that it flavors the experience, and I'm not sure if this is for the better or not. I would probably not smoke a much larger dose of DMT combined with cannabis for fear of too much anxiety and confusion during the trip. Regardless, I had a truly amazing experience the way I did it. This evening I also plan to leave less time between smoking DMT. If I remember correctly, I smoked my 24 milligrams of DMT in 2 parts, each approximately half of the material sprinkled on a small bowl pack of moderately potent cannabis. But I was quite stoned before I even started smoking the DMT, so I was certainly fully affected by cannabis during the DMT experience. I should probably also mention I took an unweighed dose of piracetam, for the first time in several weeks, about 10 hours earlier, probably around 1.5 grams. I took my first hit, holding the flame above the DMT as I drew, to burn it as slowly as possible and melting it rather than setting it on fire right away. Hold it in for 15 or 20 seconds and blow it out slowly, savoring the oddly delicious flavor of the DMT/cannabis vapors. I repeat, this time starting to burn the material and drawing a bigger lungful of smoke. I discovered a few nights earlier that this method works just fine, and in fact seems almost necessary to get all of the DMT out of the half-burnt weed. As I hold the smoke in, I can feel my mind start to expand beyond the boundaries of my skull. By the time I blew it out I was surrounded by movement and bright colors. Objects on my desk were squirming around as if I were peeking on a couple grams of really good shrooms. Except they were a bit livelier, brighter, and happier on DMT. Transparent neon colors, especially blue and yellow, forming vague and blurry geometric patterns were suspended in the air before my eyes. Every so often I would see a small glowing ball of light dash across my field of vision, or a pair of weird eyeballs pop in and out of existence in some random location. I perceived these as entities, but that I had not smoked enough to really get a better look at these things. It was also difficult not to notice the fact that I was extremely high. DMT feels similar to LSD, in the sense that the high is very much concentrated in your head. However, there is no body load to speak of. DMT feels so natural on the body. There was definitely a buzzing sensation, a floaty, fluid feeling, and a sensation that my consciousness was extended across a larger space. It feels good, but I do not find there is a huge euphoric push or forced mood lift. Most positive feelings are a result of the experience itself, not a necessary part of the drug's effects. So I put on some music. I listened to Grateful Dead, some Fish, and other mostly live hippie music over the course of the next hour or so. I found that the DMT, no doubt enhanced by the cannabis, made my music sound absolutely amazing, and made me feel like I was in the crowd, sitting outside on the grass on a sunny summer day, experiencing a concert live among a crowd of groovy people. I don't know why I decided to mess around in Photoshop at this time. But it was fun, and I enjoyed the visuals looking at the computer screen. I realized how strange and kind of lame it was to be on my computer during a DMT trip, and also realized I am pretty much tied to my computer for a lot of the time when I don't have anything else to do. But I continued to use the computer anyway. The effects of the DMT were still going strong, and I thought I better smoke it soon if I want to get any higher on this stuff before I run out. DMT seemed to erase my concept of time. It seemed like I had done too much stuff after smoking the first bowl of DMT to still be feeling it this strong. I found, looking at the clock, that my estimates of elapsed time were always much longer than reality. Also, I believe the cannabis extends the length of DMT's action. I ate 3 milligrams of melatonin, hoping it would kick in after the DMT had worn off, to help me sleep. Then I went to pack some fresh greens in my bowl with the second half of my DMT. Oops. I'd forgotten I still hadn't finished the first bowl. I finished off the cannabis in a couple more hits, along with a very noticeable amount of DMT, which raised me right back to the intensity of my first peak, which had died down a bit in the time it took me to arrive at this point. I chilled out for a couple minutes, noticing increased entity activity in the air around me. This was actually very distracting, because it seemed like they were fond of sneaking up on me. But I didn't wait long to pack those fresh greens and put the remaining around 12 milligrams of DMT on top of it. I took it all down in 3 or 4 big hits. By the time I'd blown out the second to last hit, I noticed my bed was levitating. By the time I'd blown out my last hit, there was a river, formed of psychedelic patterns, flowing through my floor. The high was getting too intense for me to sit at my desk any longer, so I quickly made a playlist on my computer that would last about 30 minutes, and then I made my way over to my bed to lie down. I experienced a sensation like my body was being gently, yet persistently pulled up into space. I would have loved to have enjoyed this sensation and meditated in this state of being, but there were far too many distractions. The amount of activity in the air, consisting of flying glowing energy balls, fluid transparent amorphous shapes, one of which remained just over my right shoulder, and followed me into the bathroom as I stood above the toilet and did my business. Let's see, what else? Oh yes, plenty of pairs of glowing eyes popping in and out of existence in random places. I would never take DMT without expecting to see those. Well, in general there was just a whole lot of things flying through the air, usually at such a quick speed that I couldn't help but divert my attention towards it. That meant I spent a lot of time lying in my bed with my eyes fully open, darting around in partial amazement, partial intimidation at all these phenomena. My intimidation simply came from the fact that they always snuck up on me. Honestly, seeing a pair of glowing cat-like eyeballs pop out of something is more creepy than cool for me. The zooming energy balls were alright, except that every once in a while one of them would flash very brightly, and a couple of times that startled me. The fluid amorphous blobs were probably my favorite, although I didn't like how they, or maybe it was just one, I never saw more than one of these at once, liked to linger over my shoulder. Also, I asked it not to follow me when I took a piss, but it did anyway. So, I spent what felt like a really long time lying in bed watching these entities. I couldn't really get much deep thinking done, although I did have plenty of trippy streams of thought that I can't remember now. My tapestries were in a state of constant reconfiguration and movement. At one point my tapestry turned into the Grateful Dead dancing bears. Except not exactly the same. Anyway, they were a weirder version of the dancing bears, but they were definitely dancing. After a while I noticed that the neon color patterns before my eyes had reappeared, and come back much more clearly defined. This time the pattern was unmistakable. It was the chrysanthemum that I've read about many times in other DMT reports. I perceived this chrysanthemum as a dome, made of interlocking almost triangles, which seemed to be suspended 5 to 10 feet above and to the front of my head. I realized that this was only a cross-section of a tunnel of sorts, with one end coming out of my forehead, and the other end extending deep into space. I couldn't tell if it was a one-way or two-way connection. It seemed like my soul was a projection of my actual existence, which was deep in space, so that I could make use of my human body, for whatever reason. During this time I was experiencing auditory hallucinations in the form of beeps, whirring sounds, made by the glowing balls of energy, and strange muffled spoken language. I thought this was fascinating, but it also made me feel a bit schizo. Well, the melatonin was starting to kick in, which seemed to be interacting with the remaining DMT, giving me a somewhat dissociated, sinking feeling which was neither enjoyable nor unenjoyable. The entities were still visible for quite a while, much longer than I expected any smoked DMT trip to last. I tried to close my eyes to see if sleep would be possible soon, and I saw a strange, mole-like beast crawling its way towards me with pretty sharp claws. Maybe 10 minutes after that I was able to close my eyes and see nothing other than a few colored blobs, and I was able to drift off to sleep very easily. I'd say I was still at a solid ++ from the DMT until about an hour after smoking it. And it's hard to limit a trip to a ++ rating when there are entities around. I didn't get any extraordinary lessons out of this trip, just like all my other DMT experiences. I found all the entities I encountered basically useless and distracting. However, I would try to be very careful setting expectations on any future experiments. I did find it somewhat recreational. Music euphoria was great, visuals were beautiful, colors were bright, and the buzz feels nice. On some levels it was very much like being dropped into the peak of an LSD trip. but I find it hard to relax around so much strange life. Perhaps if I got used to these entities, or they actually made meaningful contact with me, it would be a different story. The best part of the trip was the experience of viewing, and being attached to the chrysanthemum. I believe I gained some insights into the nature of our purpose as human beings, and this trip has only reaffirmed my belief that death is nothing to fear, and humanity is but a strange stop on our continuing journeys.